roll. Let's do this. Right.
Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Planning and Zoning Commission for Monday, November 7th. We do have an established quorum here this evening, and I am entertaining a motion to approve minutes.
Usually they're green.
I'll make a motion. Okay.
You're absolutely right, Travis. They're usually green.
They are. I'm not saying that they're not. I'm just.
They're red now.
Are they? Oh,
We also have the camera on.
Sure.
Okay.
It's been like that for a while now.
Oh,
They
okay.
switched the program.
So in other words, what you're saying is Travis and I observation skills are
Yeah.
lacking.
Apparently.
Okay, so
Apparently.
So that
right.
means it's on.
Yeah,
It's on.
in that case, then I looked.
I don't know what that means.
Pause.
Yes,
Oh.
now it's working.
Now we're just playing around during our meeting. All right.
I'm not.
I'm looking to a motion for approval of the minutes for October 17th, 2022.
Mr. Chair, I make a motion to approve the minutes for October 17, 2022.
Okay, I got a Billy for my first. I have a second.
Second.
Second by Scott. All in favor?
All right.
Any opposed? Okay. The minutes are approved. Recognizing person not on the agenda this evening. Seeing none, we'll move on. Does anybody have any conflict of interest as for what we're speaking about this evening?
No.
No.
Okay. Seeing none, we'll move on. Public hearing and action this evening. There is a zoning title and amendment brought by Brock Cherry for the Community Development Director. A request to amend City Code by addition of Chapter 1, Title 9, Section 7, Chapter 3, Title 9, Section 2, Chapter 7, Title 9, Section 4. The additions will outright permit all City of Mountain Home facilities and structures, provide a definition for city facilities and structures, and update the zoning land use chart to illustrate all City of Mountain Home facilities and structures as permitted. Mr. Cherry.
thank you, Mr. Chair. So in this item, I actually have Mr. Richard Arkady here. He's representing the applicant, which is the city, being that it's hard for me to be in a advisory role to you and an applicant at the same time. However, the reasoning for this before you today is simply so the city can continue to effectively deliver goods and services to its citizens with what we do. However, after discussing with legal, we found that the definition provided for City of Mountain Home facility structures owned or operated was fairly broad and could potentially be abused if not for having some slight oversight of the Planning and Zoning Commission and going through the City Council and just going through the process for certain uses which do have more impacts, which could be a hazard to surrounding properties. So what we have before you, which was not in your packet and will be available, we have an updated definition and then I added to it. However, note that what will be proposed as a amendment by interlineation will not be to the definition. We'll add an asterisk to the land use chart because generally you shouldn't regulate via definition. It's just statutory best practice. But the big thing is we wanted to say yes, the city is going to be allowed to do whatever it needs to do. However, there are certain uses, certain land uses that we should still follow the procedure that any private party would follow. And this is to avoid situations such as we have a single family neighborhood and we decide that's where we're going to open up our next dog pound right in the middle of it. Or that we're going to do an asphalt mix storage right next to a daycare. Or we're going to put a jail or a detention facility right in the middle of our downtown. We went through those land uses, which the city normally administers or is associated with municipal operations. And basically, I found all the scary ones where there could be an issue. And those are the ones that are brought before you today. I went through them fairly thoroughly with my staff, not just myself, but our assistant city planner. We have our permit technician, Brenda, who's been here for a long time also. And then we forwarded them on to legal for him to look at them as well. And I believe we have a more complete definition. I believe there's two arguments to be said. Let's say that we didn't add this language to what is proposed today. I would just say, well, that city council is probably not going to sit there very long. However, what this brings, it helps avoid creating a capital improvement that could be of extreme cost in a way that even after you vote someone out, it's very hard to move a jail, or move a plant, and to correct those actions. So this is just, in essence, us trying to promote good planning, good land use, multiple things associated with our comprehensive plan. We also added some clarifying language as to the sign code. And what was initially presented was the city's able to build the signs that it needs to, be it the welcome of City Mountain Home sign, be it do not be here, directional signs saying this is downtown Mountain Home, or new signs for our parks, being able to better utilize those. Legal thought it would be also, as far as the implementation of those sign initiatives, to also have some clarifying language of that in the actual sign code and have them both speak to one another. So not a big deviation, just adding further clarifications throughout the code as we use it so that we can better implement it. So with that, are there any questions with what I just explained? Any conversation you kind of want to have? Before I turn it over to the applicant, which I can tell you that the applicant's presentation is probably going to mirror exactly what I told, exactly what I
If you have any questions for me, that's
what I described to you.
Commissioner, before you have questions, do we want to open it up? Yeah?
Yeah.
Idea.
Okay. So before we do any questions from the commission, we'll go ahead and open it up to public input. Seeing none. Okay. In that case, our public input will be closed for that. Commission, questions, comments, ideas, thoughts? Since nobody, you want to go?
No, this is a tough one to guide. This is the first time we've done something like this, so I think maybe some guidance along the way, maybe just, we can have the discussion after we close, but some guidance on what a proper question would be, an emotion, exactly, yeah. So I know what direction kind of to head here. I can easily make a motion, but is it going to be correct? It's going to be the question.
So before you do that, I want to have a conversation about, I understand where the city is going and I understand what it is you guys want to do. I have a really hard time with everything being permitted. And the only reason I have that problem, and again, I also look at this as, if the city has a fire station, that fire station needs to go someplace that's going to make sure that it's going to take the safety of the city intact. My problem is, I feel as residential should be conditional with everything else being permitted. Because as the residents in the residential area should have a say as to what is in their community. Personally. Now, I could be off base here because I think there's some things, for example, if all of a sudden the city wants to open up their own maintenance shop and they put it over off South Fifth, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but that is not on that's not on our list. But it is permitted. So that's my only thought. So I'd like to hear input, thoughts, and ideas on that. I think, again, residential should be conditional. Everything else is, fine.
Dead on, yeah.
But I don't know if residential should be permitted, outright permitted.
Commissioners.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I think it's one thing, Liz, I think some of that would be where we don't have any big spots like fire station, for example. We have the kind of setup, but if we had one going into a big development that somebody's going to donate the land for us, that's where we're gonna put it. It's probably going to be in that master plan of what's coming in with that residential property if they have something. So I think that's the one thing. I can't say, I think who's up, you don't know who's gonna be on the council and mayor later on. I totally understand that. But I would think for the most part, they're going to be smart of where they put that in there because they know who their constituents are and what's happening with that. I think it's some of the smaller things where the sign piece, like Brock mentioned, Director Cherry mentioned that, like a park, when we put something in somewhere, downtown signage, where it's going to go, it's going to have to follow the same rules everybody else does, but line of sight and the vision triangle and all those things, but just being able to have to go through the sign process for that. I think it's mostly some of the process things with this more than anything, and that's kind of where that is. But I don't, we still have to get a building permit for anything, just like we do, so it's filed and all of that. But I think it's just what's permitted to go where. I think that's the major piece with this. The city's still going to follow the rules that everybody else has to.
So, on that note, I believe the executive city leadership team, as we look at big capital improvements, which can be the noisier ones, just like a fire station, and what we're looking at that, we understand in order to get the best investment of the taxpayer dollar, if we can have development donate land, we will do that all day, because it takes the purchase of the land cost out, and it lets us strategically place potential facilities. One example of that was one that has came before this body. I believe it has been a while, which is Fall Creek.
Fall Creek.
Which is Fall Creek, where they have a portion. We don't believe it's gonna, and this is where definitions are extremely important, and where our ordinance needs help, is where we plan on having a station, but we know that our stations don't necessarily. We know not all of our stations operate like Station 1, like what we have, which probably has a little bit more impact, but we do have apparatus and other stations throughout the city. They aren't manned 24 hours. Sometimes they go out, sirens ablazing, and that's not pleasant to anyone, but it's kind of a necessary evil. So Commissioner Waller, I don't disagree with you, but in its opinion by staff, nothing more, that the future building of those big capital improvements like stations will probably be associated with land use applications.
So I'm wondering if what I said wasn't quite understood properly. I don't think anybody would have a problem with a fire station in their area, because to me, when I look at a fire station, I'm like, that's safety. Okay, I have a house that's next to a fire station. That means that if something goes down, it's a quick go. For me, it's more of the city is kind of moving into, we need a bigger space for truck maintenance, vehicle maintenance. Now we're talking about autos, and now we have a bunch of that going on. Well, we have a great spot down on South 5th West because, we're building out there, and that's kind of where it's going. We got some land, but now we're within a bunch of residential. That was where I was going. I'm totally all on board for fire stations. I like those. Police stations, I like those. The jail, I agree with that it needs to be in code, written out as it needs to make sure that it's in the right area. So that's kind of where I was going. Billy?
One thing that wasn't mentioned, and just thinking about what just transpired talking about water, what about a well? So it's kind of same concept, unless I missed it.
So within the code right now, we have, I can't remember the land use. It's in your books. It's in your code if you have your code with you. It's like public infrastructure is the line, or public utility, and it's permitted across the board right now.
Okay.
So, for instance, that well that just came on down on Main Street, if you didn't have that spot there, you would have to go somewhere residential, which I know it's not a big impact once it's built, but kind of the same theory that he was describing. Because there's one on 18th by the golf course, isn't it?
Public utility transmission facility, i.e. power or water lines, is permitted all the way across. But public utility yard structures or service facility says C9922, which I don't know what 9922 says.
If the city were to ever,
Well, I think that's a gross omission that should be corrected, legally could be corrected with this amendment, which permits a well site and a pump house. A Previously, we'd put them in, where were they? Well, they're already on city facilities, so no further permits required, like the one you're
We
doing
would have
there.
to,
When you're doing it, Richard, where we did it,
yeah.
the $1 million one, your
Yeah, we're gonna have one
Geary,
prop, a Geary
Geary
prop,
or
yeah.
Katie, I mix them up.
Right, yeah, they're interchangeable. Yeah. And if the city were,
Yeah, so this requires a conditional use permit for any other entity, intrusion. See, I don't know when that's,
but we're not,
I don't know,
we're
but
not,
legally, you could construe that to apply to not just a power company, power plant or utility transmission. That's if you're talking about water lines.
That would be under easement though, wouldn't it? In that
Well,
structure?
The other thing is these uses are grouped, so they're grouped in, and and I think we went through this during boot camp. The groupings, the grouping name, i.e., calling a group of these uses as industrial, isn't controlling, right? So it's just it's grouped. They're grouped for convenience of locating or finding them in this never-ending table. So public buildings or uses, this is what this I think is what partially what's motivating this. You have government building, government office, public buildings or uses. I run into this in another city where they tried to call something a public use, and they ended up zoning a senior center for public use, and the definition of public use is crazily limited to cemeteries and parks. And so it's just it was drafted years prior to that, and I think the intent here by the staff is to legally make something kind of consistent across. Oh, it's a city of mountain home use, then you don't have to go to any of these lines. You just go to the city of mountain home use. And then where Commissioner Wallert's reluctance came in, which is something I spotted, which is, yeah, you got these uses that could be incompatible, which 9922 talks about power. But I think the intent of 9922 discussing power plant energy protection or utility is like a coal plant, or specifically when they started putting the peaking plants in. When Idaho Power, remember that? Everybody was spun up, so to speak, about that. So the first one was the one across from exit 90. Or no, that was the second one.
the Bennett Mountain's the one that's up by ours. The
Right.
other one is,
And the
I
city
can't think of that other name.
leased the site for the one, right? Didn't the city lease Idaho Power that site, or did they buy it? Okay.
They
It's
lease
leased
it.
it. So that's anyway. I don't think the intent, but that is a policy thing. It's up to you guys. I got nothing. Just trying to point you, I think legally, when I'm trying to marry up what the intent of the city staff is with what they're trying to accomplish, and making sure it does it in a legally consistent fashion.
So if I'm reading you right, we should add wells into this laundry list?
I don't think you need to. I think they're encompassed with what's stated. Oh, in terms of needing a conditional use permit, I don't, that's up to you guys. Well, I don't know. I don't know how, once a well is dug,
Right.
Some of it's,
then every once in a while they gotta bring a truck in and drag it out, cause they mess them up, but
I think
you never know, you don't even hear them.
Commissioners,
Oh, sorry.
Chairman, some of that with the, like with the well. So we have to have enough land to be able to discharge the water to start it off, because they don't just put the water right in the system, so they have a discharge area. So there's a lot to just putting something like that in the middle of a residential is probably not going to be something that's going to happen. I mean, unless it's planned for it, like in a big subdivision where you're going to have, we will give you this land for a well. For example, Meadows Trailer Park, they have a well that part of their condition is we're probably going to purchase their water rights, and they are going to give us a piece of, because it's already a sited area, somewhere close in that site. So when they do their second phase, then they were going to give us a piece of land in that section of trailer park to be able to have a well. We're going to be able to move that well to another spot, so they can make where it is now to be able to use it more functionally in some things. So, that's a well and some of the infrastructure things, like a well or a bigger thing, is going to have to be planned into something and not just stuck in the middle. The city's not going to go in and buy 4 lots in the middle of some subdivision, I don't think, and put a well in there. I just think it would be feasible. So
So I think what he was getting at then is would it be an undue burden to do a conditional use
Conditional
permit
use.
for well siting? Yes or no? That's what he's wondering. That's your guys' call,
Yeah.
not mine.
but I think
If
if
you
it's,
don't mind doing a CUP.
but I think if it's on our property, if we already own property somewhere, I think then that's where we're looking at. It's already our property. Why do we need to condition it? We should be able to put in that facility we need to right now.
However, I do get.
But I do understand where you're coming from, totally.
Commissioner Waller.
Mhm.
I follow you as far as the ancillary uses. We know as the city's getting bigger that we're probably going to do a lot more maintenance, a lot more activities. That is more than just storage of vehicles and whatnot. So I'm not opposed just using automobile maintenance as a something that we could include as a example. I wouldn't be opposed as you. Well, it's not even conditional in R1 districts. But the thing is our definitions are kind of weak. I went and looked at the definition of that, and it just says maintenance. So is changing the oil maintenance, or is there heavy maintenance? But the great thing about having a conditional use permit, and let's say, and I was trying to think it through. Let's say that we have a brand new fire station. It's in the middle or on the outskirts of a neighborhood, hopefully, because we want to be by collectors. You know that. And let's say that we start doing some maintenance. If it was to become an issue and we had someone complain that, hey, I'm hearing these guys, they're like welding in there and it's at 2 a.m. and like yada, yada, yada. Having it be conditional in the R1 district would at least give that complaining party some sort of footing of this sort of use is conditional in this area. They don't have a conditional use permit. If this is going to be how this city facility continues to operate, they should have this. So I can, for certain uses, as a staff member, such as maintenance, I see no issue with what you are proposing as being conditional in residential because it's not conditional there now. And I see it being a safeguard for the government to better facilitate complaints and find resolutions. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I truly feel as though the body of our body, the job of us is to not look at something a year or two from now, is to look at something 20 years from now when we're not here. How are we setting up the future of our city? And if we are making decisions only looking, short distances ahead, then we're going to hurt ourselves in the long run because now we've already created this precedent. Instead of going, okay, 20 years from now, when, Mr. Urquidy is no longer here, we don't have Mr. Schroeder, we don't have us on the board, and we don't have, who we currently have as city leadership. It's easy for people to look at power and take advantage of it and say, well, I'm going to do what I want, how I want. And especially in a governmental setting. And I think our job is to have less government, just personally. And again, I think this body needs to be careful with how we're creating these precedences and allowing for certain powers to dictate when and how things happen, which is why in residential, that is where your constituents truly are lying, is because that's their home, that's their place of safety, and I think it's important that they have a say what goes in or around their home. That's my only argument. Again, I have no problem with commercial and industrial because that fits right in. I just think that the people should have a say in residential areas. If the city wants to come in and say, hey, we own this and we're going to put this here, I think the city should have the opportunity, or those people should have the opportunity to come in and say, well,
Checks and balance.
mm-hmm, and that's important to me.
So, Mr. Chair, a piece of clarification, just so we can really narrow down the discussion. So, it's my thinking, city office building, 8 to 5 city office building. or an office type function. I don't necessarily, within residential districts, I don't know if in all residential areas a CUP would necessarily be merited with some of the uses. And, you know, this is an item, we don't necessarily have to nail it down today. My goal is to get something passed by the end of the year and have it implemented. So it's not something we have to rush through. But one thing that what we could do as staff is we could look at some of, because I believe we got the scariest uses. We could look at the maintenance, the ones that aren't traditionally in residential districts, and I could go through and unless this body thinks it should be all. If this body thinks that it should be all, then I'm not here. Yes, I have my ideas, but you're the recommending body, and I don't think that line of thinking is unfounded. But there's some city uses where I'm like, there really aren't a ton of impact, or there's uses here that the city will never be involved in. I hope that we never have to have a slaughter and meat packing department.
Wrong government if you do.
It is. Or auction houses, but like, you know, one thing that comes to mind right here is art galleries and supplies. I think if we were to have a city office building and we were to display art or have a little art gallery in it and it was in a residential district, that maybe a conditional use permit by virtue of who's operating, who is the city, and this line of thinking may be way off, isn't necessarily needed. So basically, the best thing that this body could provide staff right now is, like Mr. Wallert proposed, and I can see the merits of both arguments. Should it be all uses in residential districts operated by the city should be conditional? Or should we look at the medium scary ones and make sure that those are the conditional ones? Or basically, do you kind of get what I'm saying, Mr. Chairman?
I do. I get what you're saying.
Just like, what about like a satellite library? If we had some city property somewhere in the middle of a subdivision,
You're right.
satellite library.
And you know there's going to be someone coming out saying, I hate kids reading.
So,
then, okay, so my question becomes, and I'm with you on that. I agree. I like the idea. I think it goes also back to the fire station. A fire station, I think, should be outright permitted because, again, that's a factor of safety. I like the idea of staff kind of going through and maybe looking at some of the areas and things that may be more conditional use. I just have a really hard time with permitted all the way through because that's very vague language, and we don't want vague language because there's things that can be permitted that you shouldn't have permitted, if you understand what I'm saying on that. So I like the idea of staff going through and kind of realigning what may be conditional, what may be outright permitted. I think that'll be helpful. And I don't know if we table it until staff has the opportunity or we make a decision tonight.
I would. Sorry, Mr.
No, go ahead.
What I would probably recommend, based on the information you provided, and even based on the work that myself and legal has done together, that if we can table it, if legal sees that as the best way, that we're continuing to be transparent, then I say let's go ahead and table it. Right now, what was in the newspaper was the silver bullet that the city is able to certainly do as long as it's city owned and operated. We are able to do it. Whereas I think what we're doing now is we're saying no, there's certain things that the city does need to follow certain protocols for certain uses, and it's not nearly as open. So I'm not the legal. I think it could be tabled, but I would just follow any recommendation that legal has for us.
Brock, what about industry that, kind of going on what he was stating that we haven't thought of 20 years from now? Say that, we're in fiber right now, and say that we get into a different type of industry that could be used as city property that could be put in residential. I think that's kind of where my thinking at is aligned with you. Like, we don't know what the future brings. So if we do a peanut butter approach, everything's going to be approved. And there should be some limitations where the resident of this neighborhood would have some say in it. because we just don't know. Say that, you know, I'm just using this for example, that we got into Facebook and had a big meta, I don't know if I was saying that right, meta organization, you put servers out there in the middle of somewhere, you know.
So
I know that's far-fetched, but just something kind of, I don't know if there's language we could put in there that,
Scott?
Chairman, that's actually not that far-fetched. The last municipality that I resided in, they had that exact scenario with a server farm being created in adjacent to a residential neighborhood, like a budding residential neighborhood in the county. And it was, if I recall that correctly, it was outright permitted that the county maintained control of the land and leased that land to the company on a 100-year lease. And that went up, and there was massive kickback from residents. So I can foresee, based on that experience, I could see where your concern would come from, in the sense that, you know, nobody projected that business would be occupying city leased property for that use. They had massive air conditioning units to control that, the temperature of that facility. I mean, that's spot on to your type of concern.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, so the distinction here is city operated versus city owned. So while like for example, the peaking plant and in the ditch towing, these companies occupy city owned, and the pilot, in fact, and then the Conchemco building, all sit atop city property. But those uses are being done by private entities, and so those uses still must follow the conditional use permitting like everyone else. The intent of this is if the city, acting as the city, doing one of its municipal functions, wants to do a city use on city property or on leased property to the city, then it doesn't have to jump through the hoops. So there's a difference in that.
Agreed.
A slight difference. So to tell you, this is helpful, and I use this as a guide every once in a while. Title 50, Chapter 3 is a list of all the stuff that cities have the power to do. So, cities promote general welfare, recreation and culture, preservation of public health, hospitals, public carriers, so bus systems, buses, maintenance of peace, licensing and regulation, licensing occupations and businesses, fire departments, regulating hazardous materials, creating and vacating streets, improving streets, supervising public ways, regulating streets and public places, sidewalks, removal of snow, ice, rubbish, and weeds, animals at large, requiring identification of streets and houses, cemeteries, aviation facilities, transit systems, domestic water systems, power plants, sale of excess power, control of waters, flood prevention, abatement of nuisances, destruction of buildings inimical to safety and health, solid waste disposal. So those are all the things that a city is legally empowered to do. So that gives you an idea of the menu of things you can try to jam into or around this table and figure out which one. So solid waste disposal, we don't have dumps anymore. We used to, but they're all sealed up and cleaned up.
Not one still working on it.
Still working on one, so we contract that out. But we used to have garbage trucks and dumpsters all out at that the Public Works by Albertsons, right? So the idea is just exactly what he was saying. So you're gonna have some city-owned property. Are we gonna let Republic Services come in and occupy that? Well, they're doing a city function on city property, but they're a contractor, so they're a private entity. I think in the case of Meta and CUNA, they're doing private work. They're not doing a city function. So that's kind of the difference. So what's the hazard in? We decide we're not going to contract with Treasure Valley Transit to drive an empty bus around all day. We're going to do it ourselves for half the. Sorry. Anyway, so the city could need a place to when we grow, right, be able to put in a bus garage, maybe, underground bus station or something, like Boise has. What, this is your decision, what of these city functions on city property or on leased property do you think the city should be able to just go and do without having to ask anyone? Which entangles the process too much to be efficient, and which degree of control do you think the citizens and the council should have over the city just opening something up? You all hit the nail directly on the head, and these two have answered it directly. You know, we're not going to put a well in a 50-foot wide lot in an R4 subdivision unless there's a swimming pool next door, and that is probably adequate. So some of this stuff is self-limiting, but I just, from the 50,000-foot view of a guy who's going to have to write the ordinance so that it protects the people who are likely to be impaired and how we're going to enforce it. And when at some point somebody comes along and says, well, we're going to put up a flam whipple and a zip zapper 50 years from now, and somebody says, well, this requires, well, that's not even a permitted use, and now you can't do it. And now they've got to spend 3 weeks amending the ordinance. I think that's the kind of foresight they're trying to project onto this
And I think the
unwieldy table.
utility is a big piece with that. Chairman, Commissioners, I think, let's take the north end when they had, we had to put the medium pressure booster in there. So, we tried to, we put it on city property that we had, because we had all that park area up there off of Third. But I mean, no, it's in a pretty much kind of residential area. But I mean, that they had to have that so they could have pressure. I mean, there's certain thing that utility is kind of a big piece. It's the best place. I mean, it might be that the only place that was available to do that was we could get the lot in between two places, because that lot was still for sale. And I mean, we're going to have to get that lot and put it there so that we can maintain and be able to get water and to people. So those are some questions. So.
Yep, I follow that.
Chairman?
Yes.
So for staff and legal, are you leaning towards, as a recommendation, that the definitions that we expressly state within these uses shall still conform, that we should encompass more and more specifics when, as we've kind of poked at as a commission, saying, well, we don't know what that cone of uncertainty brings for the future of technology, what the city is going to take part in. I mean, 20 years ago, if you sat down with somebody, a resident or a commissioner here or a city council person, and go, do you ever think that we're going to get into the business of having a fiber optic utility under the heading of a city? Which
we do. Fiber is a utility in the city of Mount Hope.
Right.
So that fits the same thing as just like water, sewer. And so a good example is, excuse me, you can finish, and I have an great example for you.
Well, I mean, so I guess my question is, as I think I'm capturing Chairman Wallert's question here, would it not be easier to say any uses of city within the R4 designation should have a conditional use permit, versus trying to capture not only everything that's expressly stated in code, but that cone of uncertainty of what may happen in the future? Because I do see the point, in the sense that the residents of the city comprise the constituency of the city. I mean, they should have a say in that at all points.
Rich?
Chairman, Commissioners, a good example of fiber utility, for example. Here's something that just popped in my head. So on 10th Street, there's an abandoned well site. It's like probably, I'm going to say it's this skinny right here. It's about this size. This is the lot right here. From maybe, Councilman Commissioner Drake to here, and about that wide. So we used to have a well site right there. So it's abandoned. The wellhead's still, it's all covered up. It just sits there. So somebody wanted to get that piece of property. The neighbor who wanted us to abandon it and give it to them because we'll take care of this and do this. But an example would be that it's on a main street, if we had a fiber hut that needed to go right in that spot right there, it's right in the middle of, it's sitting right there. A fiber hut's just a building with power, has an extra thing that has a generator or something. It's a great spot for something like that. So those are, again, I think the important piece is if it's a utility. I think that's right there in one of the codes that talked about that. Those are things that, to be efficient and city to be able to run a utility and to get power and water and sewer and whatever to the city, they should be able to do that. And that's in the best interest of the city. We're going to put it in the best place that we possibly can. I mean, I think that's the whole thing. I mean, again, the well piece, we don't want to put that right in the middle because it comes on the middle of the night, it runs, things are noisy, that's how that is. We're trying to get it in places where we can. So, but like your example for a shop, totally makes sense to me. I mean, if the city were to sell the one downtown and move, which actually is probably in the long-term plan, we're going to sell that piece of property. It's probably more valuable as a commercial property with something on that. We have enough space out there. We're just going to build a bigger building, move all the public works out there, have 12 bays to be able to put our trucks in and do all our maintenance right out in there. So those are things that's, well, it's an I something, it's an I4, or I3, we'd probably be okay because it's permitted. But again, I think the city having something, that type of a piece that's conditional, to put a maintenance facility in the middle of, just doesn't make sense to put it in the middle of an R1 subdivision.
Right.
So we have trucks coming in and out. So that totally makes sense what you're saying. So
And then
hopefully I've explained enough things to kind of our thought process. of
Yep.
what we've been doing.
No, absolutely. I appreciate it too.
And then it comes back, which someone can give the thing. Well, we have a representative for our government. We vote for city council people to make certain decisions and to provide certain oversight. Is that enough? And when we talk about having smaller, more effective government, so the conversation we're having is fantastic because there's a dichotomy that exists there.
I think it's enough, but there's also a good thing to have checks and balances in there as well, just because that can go down a whole different rabbit hole. I think checks and balances just to keep the spirit is not a bad thing. 'Cause it could be just as like you said, we're going to put this, we do it, yep, residents doesn't say anything, boom, we're good, but at least give the voice to the public in case, like you said, just to hold that spirit.
So, Mr. Chair, if you want to proceed kind of with the idea for certain, what I deem as medium impact uses being conditional in residential districts, I think that's the best way. Commissioner Harjo, they recommended an easier way for us would just be, well, all city uses in a R1 or a R2 district conditional use permit. Well, then that would allow us to do a shooting range as long as we have a conditional use permit in a residential area, which maybe it works. Maybe we're going to be extremely innovative and find a way to make it work. But I think as far as exploring good policy making, what was originally recommended by Commissioner Wallert to look at those uses which should be conditional in residential, to go through there, because I'm also, and maybe I'm biased because I'm a bureaucrat, but I think if we want to build a library in a neighborhood, that those are good things, and that the city council can be trusted with that discretion and not a land use chart or a park, because you guys have sat through land use meetings, and it's all about being effective in our governance of what ultimately people would like. So I see a very real compromise and tabling it, taking the week, tweaking things, looking at those medium impact uses, such as maintenance or other things that could disturb the neighborhood character of an area where right now maybe it's not permitted, and looking at those, and also giving this body the opportunity to look through your land use chart. It's not that long, and coming to your own conclusions as well. I don't see that as a poor way forward. I think if we can get that done, come again, make a firm recommendation. You are a recommending body. We take that to city council, give it to them, And if they don't like it, they can send it back.
Mr. Chairman,
Sure.
you may want to also consider, like we did with the accessory dwelling unit
Could be
exercise, because this is a legislative decision, having once you get it really tweaked, then having a joint meeting with the city council at the same time, and then come up with a final product.
No, I think that's a great idea.
Then we can take into account the comprehensive plan and what we do, and then be able to talk to, kind of just be able to agree with the city council in regards to the uses and all that. I don't think that's a bad idea. At first, I was looking at all of this stuff, and going, well, these are still items that will need to go through some sort of approval process, the ones in yellow, correct? So, but we're saying that this isn't enough, that we want to be able to.
I think what we're saying is that's not an exhaustive list.
Yeah,
I think we need to look more carefully at.
Or additional residential protection.
Yep.
yeah.
Yep, absolutely.
Yep.
That's
No, I,
It's like you do this, and that's, the wording. Let's go.
I don't disagree.
but
Okay.
I'm in agreement, and that's a great idea, and maybe in the future we do revisit the whole ADU conversation as well.
So how do you, I know that in order to table something, we need to have a specific date, because it needs to be a specific date, and doesn't,
21st.
Well, I would say that what we're doing is probably going to end up revising this substantially enough that it might need new notice. I mean, what we're ending up with is significantly dialed back, which was everything everywhere, was the first version that was published in the newspaper. And you can see the uproar. So if it's going to be less, right? Just what's a substantial change between what you noticed and what ends up going to the council? So what it might be safe, we can table the discussion some more, but ultimately we should probably notice the final product that you're going to have the joint meeting with. So in other words, we table this to the 21st, come up with a perfectly fine-tuned one, and then you set a notice for the city and you to meet with the published document. We notice it in the paper. What do you think, Brock?
I think that's
And again, you might
think
not
that's a
want to.
fantastic idea.
You might come and say, "Nah, this is good, we're just gonna give it to them."
Yeah.
So,
well, the 21st? Yeah, okay.
yeah.
No, I think
You don't
that's a
have to
good
notice,
one.
you can just say, "No, I think we like what we came up with here," and we'll just give them the recommendation, have them go through it. I mean, I think that needs.
No, I will not be here on the 21st.
I think I won't either.
But you'll have Rich and Chris.
But
maybe.
I'm not gonna be here either, because I'm taking that week off.
Well, let's not have.
I'm gone.
I'm at Paul.
Let's not have it that
Let's
day.
table it to
I'm in
next-
Arizona.
So should we table it to the meeting in December?
I think that'd
I
be better.
am. I'm sorry. Arizona
I-
State
so the
calls
first-
The
me.
meeting in December.
First meeting in December?
Thinking it's a Monday.
Yeah, it's the
Well, let's get it.
third, third. Yeah, I'll be driving back from Disneyland that day.
That's
Sorry,
not
guys.
what I wanted.
Hold on. I'll get.
20, what's not a good week.
You're going to Disneyland?
Yeah,
That's right. You've never been. Have you?
I have been.
Oh,
I
you
used to
So
go
is
every
it,
year.
it's the second and third, right? Or second and,
We only
I
have
don't
one
live
meeting
close
in
enough
December.
anymore, so I don't.
so that'd be the 5th or the 12th?
The fifth.
I'm going.
It's the first week.
Are you sure?
It's the first Monday.
So it's the 5th.
Yeah.
Let me just take the 2 seconds to verify. Not that I don't trust.
Oh, I got it right
our,
here.
Our
I got
public
the whole
works
table
director.
here. It's right, 5th of December right here. I got
That's
I got
right
the whole
there?
meeting
The
table.
5th of December.
5th of December.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because the next one's the 3rd of January.
Because I don't like the idea of having it 21st because that's Thanksgiving week.
Yep.
And yeah, so I think the 5th would be good. With the goal to have it finished and completed before the end of the year.
Yeah.
By the January
We're still on
3rd.
that.
Yes, that's the goal.
Okie dokie.
Okay. So that means I need a motion to table.
Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to table the action item PZ-22-96, moving out to the date of 12/5, our planning and zoning meeting at that date.
Okay, so we got a first by Scott, second.
I second.
Second by Christina. We'll go down the table. Travis?
Aye.
Billy?
Aye.
Christina?
Aye.
And Scott?
Aye.
An aye for me as well. That is tabled until December the 5th.
Sweet.
So there's no new business. We got a couple of things here. One thing, actually, that we need to approve the finding of facts.
Okay. I'd like to make a motion.
Go ahead.
I move to approve the findings of fact for PZ 2290.
Okay, have a first, have a second.
Second.
Second by Scott. Scott, both you.
Aye.
Christina?
Aye.
Billy?
Aye.
Travis?
Aye.
Ayes, me as well. Motion passes. Okay, and for PZ 2291.
Okay, I'd like to make a motion
Okay.
to approve the findings of fact PZ 2291.
Okay, have first, have a second.
Second.
Second by Billy and Travis.
Aye.
Billy?
Aye.
Christina?
Aye.
Scott?
Aye.
And aye for me as well. Motion passes. Any questions or comments about the monthly code enforcement report or monthly building permit report?
Negative. None for me.
Okay.
Did you
hearing none.
guys get to see the EDU stuff already?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Okay. Hearing nothing else, we are adjourned at 6:50.